Hey everybody, Robert here from blackbeltgaming. I hope you're doing well. I'm continuing my read-through of Adventures Dark and Deep by Joseph Bloch. This is basically first edition AD&D expanded in a direction that was originally envisioned by Gary Gygax. Let's talk about races today. We did ability scores in our last video, and I'm just going to talk about humans today. Gary originally designed AD&D to be very centered on the human race, and there was some balancing going on in the game with level limitations and humans not having those same limits. But demi-humans, things like your, races like your dwarves and elves and gnomes, they had other special abilities. They could perhaps see in the dark or have a better chance to find secret doors or other things. And we're going to be looking at those races. But in the long run, they were sometimes limited as to what class they could be, what level they could reach. And humans don't have such restrictions. So let's read a little bit about humans today. Humans are the standard against which all other races are measured. They can thrive in nearly any environment. Their ability scores range from 3 to 18. However, female fighters that have exceptional strength, like we talked about in the last video, they do have a limitation of maxing out at 18/50. Where human male fighters can go up to 18/100. That's still exceptionally strong, though. Humans have enormous diversity in their appearances and in their cultures due to the campaign setting. So remember, this game is not going to have a particular setting for you. You're going to be playing in one that's created by your game master, or perhaps you as the game master, or you might be playing in a setting that's already established, like Greyhawk or something like that. So you need to follow your game master's guidelines as to what kind of humans are allowed. And these are some just general guidelines for the humans in these different campaign settings. You can roll for your height, both for male and female. You can also roll for your weight. And there are some guidelines on ages: young adult, mature, middle age, old, and very old. Unlike non-humans, human characters are not able to multiclass. Multiclass means that, say, if you're an elf, you might be able to be both a fighter and a magic user at the same time. Humans, traditionally in AD&D, could not do this. What they possibly could do, if their ability scores were high enough, is they could change careers one time, or change classes one time in their careers. So they might start out as a fighter, and then they might be able to switch over to thief, something like that. So they do not receive, humans, they do not receive any special bonuses or penalties to their ability scores. And they don't receive any special racial powers, and we'll see that the other races do. But their strength is that they can rise to any level and be of any class, and that gives them a significant advantage. And it explains why, in large part, it explains their dominance of many worlds. So the most powerful wizards, the strongest fighters, those are going to be humans. So that's how it was done. Just on a side note, I've been playing this game since the 1980s. And back when I was learning the game in the very early 80s, the group that was teaching me how to play, they really favored demi-humans. And they decided as a house rule in their group that they were going to eliminate level limits. So that means if their demi-human character was limited to level 7, they were just going to remove that so that they could level up as high as they wanted to go, just like humans could. I didn't really see a problem with that when I first started, but over time I started to recognize that really puts humans at a disadvantage. Why would you want to play a human when everybody else can see in the dark? Everybody else gets some sort of bonus to this, that, and the other. They can be two classes at the same time. So I started to see some issues with that, and I did play around myself with some house rules for some alternatives. I started to allow humans to multiclass, and then inspired by the deities and demigods, I started to, as a young game master, I started to allow people to put experience points into multiple classes as they saw fit, and they gained the full hit points and full abilities of those different classes. And again, that was inspired by deities and demigods, especially those hero write-ups, where heroes tended to have so many levels in fighter, and so many levels in magic user, and so many levels in ranger. And I thought that those were some neat combinations and wanted to implement something there. But that's all on the side. That was house rules for back in the day. So here, strictly by the book, Adventures Dark and Deep, and sort of in line with AD&D First Edition, non-humans are going to have some limitations. And you want to pay attention to those and enforce those. Otherwise, your humans will be outshined. So any class, any level. But something interesting here that AD&D didn't specifically do, but is done in Adventures Dark and Deep. It considers barbarian a culture, almost like a subclass or subrace of human. Barbarian cultures are cultures that are not civilized. They distrust civilization. They also have an instinctive mistrust of magic. And they might be okay with some magic coming from maybe a cleric or some shaman or something of their particular bloodthirsty god. But in general, the wizards and illusionists and such, they're going to be very uncomfortable with. And this is somewhat inspired by literature, but also in the first edition write-up of the barbarian in Unearthed Arcana. But again, this is talking about just human barbarians that could be a fighter, or they could be a thief. They're still going to have these same beliefs. They don't have to be of the barbarian classes to be from a barbarian culture. So they're treated as humans, but if you are from a barbaric culture, you can't take a class which uses magic, such as a bard, illusionist, etc. They have an anti-magic bias. So that means that they have an intense distrust of magic users and magical items. Clerics and cleric spells, including those cast by their own primal shamans and witch doctors, are not included. But sometimes certain high-level character spells will fall into the category as well. So clerics, my daughter's screaming in the next room. Clerics might get a pass, but there may be some high-level cleric spells that might be a bit of a problem for those of a barbaric culture. So we might have to dig into the spells to see what exactly that's about. In practice, this means a barbarian character will only grudgingly remain in the presence of a spellcaster other than a cleric or a subclass of cleric. They will tend to belittle and scorn them and even refuse beneficial spells being cast upon them. And they'll also be kind of reluctant to aid friendly spellcasters in battle, except for those that have been comrades to the barbarian for some time and kind of proven their loyalty. So if you can think back to the old Conan the Barbarian movie, at first, Conan was quite uncomfortable there with the wizard in the movie who claimed that he could summon demons, but he ended up saving Conan's life, and by the time the second movie was made, we saw that the wizard was now a regular companion of his and traveled with the party and helped him out just like any other character did. That was after trust was earned. So you could have sort of a similar thing going on in your own campaign world and your stories. So, because of this mistrust of magic, barbarians will actively seek to destroy magical items except those specifically intended for their use. And they'll earn experience points for doing so the way that other character classes gain experience points for finding and keeping these magical items. So even magical items intended for or belonging to clerics do not automatically escape this violence. So kind of as a group we'll be making judgments about this. The innate loathing of all things enchanted allows the barbarian to strike creatures of a magical nature, such as demons, gargoyles, and certain undead, that are normally only injured by magical weapons. With such ferocity, they can strike with such ferocity that ordinary weapons will harm them. And so, for example, by level 4, a barbarian, remember this is talking about the culture, a barbaric thief could attempt to hit and damage a creature that can only be hit or damaged by +1 weapons or better. So even though he had a normal spear, he could still hit this creature and damage it. So I believe they're taking that idea from, at least from what I've seen from the Unearthed Arcana write-up of the barbarian class. The barbarian as a class we're going to get to later. So remember, this is the kind of the sub-race of human that we're talking about. So it doesn't actually give the barbarian an actual bonus to hit or damage, but it just gives them a chance to hit and damage that supernatural creature, that enchanted creature. Secondary skills and weapons, coming to the end of the barbaric humans. The exact details of human barbarian characters depends on the terrain and climate from whence they come. All barbarians start with the appropriate woodcraft secondary skill as a free bonus. So we'll be talking about some of these secondary skills later. So let's take a look at some of these different climates. The cold forest. Barbarians from this area will have the woodcraft, cold forest secondary skill. And possibly the seamanship, ocean-going skill as well. For weapons, they will prefer daggers, axes, thrown and hand and battle axes, long swords and spears. So kind of sounding a bit Viking there. But you can have barbarians from other climates, such as the desert, the steppe, the tropical forest, the tropical jungle. So let's take a look at the tropical jungle. They have experience with river canoes. So a secondary skill, seamanship with fresh water, as well as woodcraft from the tropical jungle. The preferred weapons for them are things like the blowguns and clubs and short bows. So just as a final note, in the human section, it talks about other sub-races of human. Some campaign settings will have human sub-races with abilities, ability score modifiers, and other things like you have with sub-races like elves, dwarves, and halflings. This is up to the game master. So let's say if you wanted to play a game set in Conan's world, and you wanted to have everybody be human, but you wanted Cimmerians to be different from Stygians. Well, then you might have some sub-races written in there where Cimmerians get this bonus and this penalty, and they like to use the following things, and they get the following skills. From Stygia, they like to use this, this, and this, and they get this advantage, and they get this penalty. You can create that. And that was one of the wonderful things we used to enjoy so much with first edition AD&D, is each game you played in could be different based on what the different game masters wanted to do in their worlds. And of course, there were some official worlds to play in that provided a lot of guidance on these particulars. But I think I'll wrap it up there. Interesting look at humans and an interesting take on barbarians. Barbarian as a culture, as a sub-race of human. So we'll talk about some other races very soon, some of the non-human races. And thanks for listening, everybody, and I'll catch you later.